I think we're live in the studio, the Quilt Beginning studio. It always takes a minute for the internet to catch up. But here we are. We're going to be talking applique today. We've got some really fun samples. Pam's going to be walking us through. I just love that sample. We're going to get a close-up view here in a minute. But I wanted to show you guys. Hello, hello. Okay, so we're still evolving our Facebook Live routine. So this is my tripod rotating, and coming in for some fun new fabrics and kits. Hey, Marcia. So this is Katie at Quilt Beginnings. I'm not on a phone, so maybe I'll turn it. Hi. Okay, there I am. And hello, Patty from South Carolina. Nice to see you joining in. So I just wanted to show you real quick before we get into the meat and potatoes, just some really fun, patriotic Riley Blake fabrics we just got in. I don't have all the bolts. They are making our front of the store beautiful, but we've got some lovely fat quarter bundles. Just super cheerful, beautiful, patriotic, just in time for summer. This box kit, I'm just really excited about. It's Stars in Stripes, really fun, kind of featuring all these fabrics, just a really fun, patriotic quilt. So we've got these box kits in store. Little Land of Liberty panel. So this, I know Joyce was taking this picture today. This actually is a panel. I think it would be a super cute piece, but that panel is just a fun pieced look of a flag. Nice patriotic item. And I'm just going to kind of speed through our little sample section. I wanted to give you guys a little bit of eye candy before we get again to the meat and potatoes, where Pam's going to walk us through some really fun stuff. But this pattern here, this broken chevron, I'm very excited to see made up. I would love someone to make a kit, or to grab a kit, make one, and bring it in so I can see it in person. It features this loose leaf collection from Robert Kaufman, and we actually have kitted it with both a dark background and a light background, so you have options. I think it would look really fun either way. Again, the pattern obviously includes the dark background, but I think that with a light background, it could really, really shine. Okay, so let me put my little tripod back on my wheelie table, and I'm gonna scoot on back into the studio here and welcome our guest educator for the day, Miss Pam.
Hello.
Oh wait, there you are.
Can you see me? Okay.
Yes, now you're on.
Let me know if you can hear me, if I need to talk up or whatever. So anyways, we had this pattern sitting here on the shelf, and I saw it and I thought, this is really cute. But what I really liked was, and this was a featured bundle a couple weeks ago on our Facebook Live. So I love all these bright colors, and I'm like, what can I do with them? And as I walked around, I found this pattern, and I said, this is what I want to do. So anyways, this is going to be a class for IQ Designer, which is part of a baby lock. We'll get there in just a minute, but we were talking about how this is applique. So this is not a pattern for an embroidery machine. Can you see it?
Yeah, let's zoom in a little bit.
So it is just standard traditional applique. Really cute, really easy to do. And so as I decided I wanted to do this, we started talking about the way we used to do applique and how far we've come in the applique world. So when I started, oh gosh, I've been quilting for a long, long time, but back in the 90s when I got into sewing and all of that, really wanting to do fun stuff, I had seen the pattern behind me. So if you see all of the detail on this pattern, and those were my days of doing hand quilting and all of that.
This quilt is entirely hand quilted. Oh my God. When we unfolded it, I just was stunned at all the work in this.
I was actually writing on the back of the quilt, so it was finished in 1995, and it's all hand quilted. But I wanted to do this quilt, but it was applique. And back then, I only knew applique as taking some kind of a pattern and turning it under a 1/4 inch, and then going through and whip stitching it by hand. And for those of you who know me, you know I don't do too much by hand except for whip stitching my binding. So I really wanted to do this quilt, and I'm like, but I don't do handwork. So I had a Singer machine at the time, and it only did a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch. I knew nothing else except for the fact that there was a Bernina out there, and this Bernina did a really cool stitch. I come to find out later that the stitch is actually a blind hem stitch. So this whole thing was done on a sewing machine. So I went and I got my first Bernina, and all of these templates had to be cut out by hand, but they were sewn using the sewing machine. So I'm going to have Katie come down to my little sample. So let's say I had a starfish pattern that I wanted to do. Back in the day, to do this technique, you actually used parchment paper. So yes, parchment paper that you buy in the grocery store. And so you would take your design and you would cut out a template. So like a cardstock template.
He's so happy.
Yes. And then you would trace it, and then you would cut the design out. And parchment paper, if you've ever, I mean freezer paper, if you've ever used it, you know it's sticky or kind of slick on one side. So you iron it in place. So you would iron it, and then you would go and you would cut a 1/4 inch around everything. So some of you watching, I hope you've done this at one time in your life, but then you would take this and you would take water-soluble glue, and we would come down and you would go ahead and you would clip. So I'd literally take my scissors and I would clip all the way around here. And then you would take your water-soluble glue, not purple, this was a kid's stick, and you would flip it in like this. And as it gets real gluey and the glue sinks in, it was real easy to turn it. But your hands would turn out sticky and everything. So anyways, you would end up with your template something like this. And then you would take this and you would place it on your piece of fabric. And of course, all the edges were turned under. And then what you did back in the day was you chose, and I didn't know it at the time, but it was the blind hem stitch. And you would put clear monopoly thread in your needle and bobbin thread that matched the background of your quilt. And you would set it to a teeny tiny stitch. And basically what it would do is it would do 2 little stitches, then bite into the fabric. So if I was sewing this on, it would do 2 little stitches, bite into the fabric, 2 little stitches, bite into the fabric. And you would go all the way around it. When it was finished, you would turn it over, and now we could see what the starfish looked like. And we would cut this paper, the background fabric away, and you would wet it, and you would let it get real wet so it would get soggy. And then with this cut out, you could go in there and peel all this paper out from behind. That was the way that I learned to do applique, but I was doing it by machine.
And is that how you did that entire quilt?
I did the entire quilt
With glue sticks and
with glue sticks,
parchment
paper, cutting it out. And so if you had a quilt that had multiple pieces of the same thing, like this one, you could stack up your parchment paper and cut or freezer paper. You could cut like all 8 of those at one time.
You've always been efficient.
So, I mean, if one's a little bit off, it's okay, because flowers aren't the same, right? And so I could really go around these circles quite fast. But that's how we did it back in the day, because I didn't want to needle turn everything and do it by hand. So that was my first experience with applique. And then time passed, and I knew that everybody now went to doing applique, doing raw edge applique. So raw edge applique, taking the same kind of template, we would use something like either heat and bond, or this is Steam-A-Seam Light. And what you would do is trace your pattern on the Steam-A-Seam, and then you would cut your pattern out like this. Now the problem with this is, if something was directional, so it wasn't symmetrical, you had to make sure that when you flipped it, it was going to be the right way. So it's very challenging, but
You really had to think.
you had to think. But then with the Steam-A-Seam Light, it's fusible on both sides, it's sticky on both sides. So when we peeled this away, you would take this and then you would iron this to your fabric. So I would take it and I would iron it on here. Now the reason why I used a fusible fabric is after this is washed a lot, you want to make sure that this is fused on. Also, when you fuse it on here, your edges, they're really sealed. So if you wanted to, you could just be done here. But as a quilter, we want to really finish the edge some way. So it's called raw edge because we're not turning the edge under. You can see that this is a raw edge here. So now there's basically 3 ways that most people, if you have a sewing machine, not an embroidery machine, you can just go to your sewing machine and we can go in here and we can sew this down. So the first way that we would do it is we would just do a straight stitch and it would totally be raw edge. So I'm going to go over to my machine right now and show you that.
All right.
So I just took a random piece of fabric that has all kinds of angles, etc.
What a beautiful shape.
Yeah.
Really inspired.
You can see it. There you go. And this is what we call a narrow edge foot. And the narrow edge foot has this flange in the middle, but it has a big opening here. So if I wanted to, I could put this in most machines. I can't think of any machine that doesn't have a narrow edge foot. It's like a stitch in the ditch foot, only it has a wider part. So what I would do is just choose a straight stitch on my sewing machine.
Turn the lights down on the Solaris.
We can.
It's got such beautiful lighting, but I think it gets a little bright.
Let's turn her down. Glad you asked. I can sure do that.
We can do anything.
Like, take
We
this
just ask.
baby down. We can turn her, well, you probably
Hey! No, I
can you
think
see it if it's off? Or do you want me to turn it on a little bit more?
we'll see. I think that looks better. So let me know if you guys need more light,
Okay.
but I'm thinking that's better.
Okay. So when I do this, if I were going to sew with my foot, this is the edge, that flange. If I sew here, I'm just going to stitch in the ditch. But what I would do is just go to my stitch width, and I would move the stitch width over a little bit to the right. So when I'm doing this, my
To the
needle,
left,
to
right?
the left. I'm sorry, my needle is
Okay, I thought I was backwards.
Yeah.
So you want your
Actually,
needle to be on
the fabric. Correct. Now, whenever you're doing applique in your machine, sewing, on the sewing part, you want to add some kind of a stabilizer on the back, okay? Now, it's not the stabilizer that we use for when we do the embroidery machine. That's really heavy. It's accommodating a lot of stitches. This is just stabilizer that you buy on a bolt. We're going to be able to tear it away when we're finished. But what it does is it supports those stitches, and when we're finished, we're going to tear it away. But basically, when I move my needle to the right and I start sewing,
The left.
let me get it to
Correct.
the left. I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure I'm following.
Let me keep. I'm going to move it all.
So you're moving it pretty
over.
far to the left.
Yes, I'm moving it pretty far to the left so that you can see it. And this is really the simplest form of raw edge applique. I'm still going to have the raw edge, but when I sew, and I've gone really far over.
Oh, this machine's quiet. It's lovely.
But at least you can see it. I'm putting purple thread in here, okay? But what you can see, and I'm standing up. Katie said I said I would stand up. I won't blame it on her. But anyways, you can see that this is just
a straight
stitch. Okay? So, but since this is ironed on, that's not going to lift. But that is just raw edge, straight applique. And if you're ever doing machine applique, some of Kimberbell's things that they do, if they're doing pleather or they're doing some kind of vinyl, they'll just do a straight edge stitch. The other thing that we could have done, and this is what a lot of people do, is we can use a satin stitch. So if we go to a satin stitch, we're still going to use this, our little guide in the middle, because what it's going to do is it's going to zig on one side, zag, zig, zag, zig, zag. So we're trying, the goal is to keep our stitch nice and straight. You can make it as wide as you want, but we're going to make the length really, really tight so that it is a nice satin stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and put this down, and since I don't have light, I'm really sewing in the dark.
I know, she's sewing in the dark, standing up, crouched over a cabinet. We really make it hard on you here.
So anyways, here is my satin stitch. So you can see it's on one side, and it's basically burying this, so your raw edge is now not showing at all. We still have a raw edge under here because we didn't do the quarter turn, but you're not going to see it. Now, a lot of people come to class and they say to me, they say, my machine jammed. It wouldn't let me do that satin stitch. So there are basically two kinds of feet on your machine. And I don't know if you can see this. But do you see how this has the open channel in the back? When you're doing something that is a heavy satin stitch, you're probably going to notice that if you have integrated the IDT on a FOF machine, or some of the new Berninas have those, if you are using the integrated dual feed, which is your dual feed, you're not going to be able to use it if your machine's going back and forth. And most of those have closed feet back here, so you wouldn't be able to engage it anyhow. But if your fabric is not feeding through, when you're using a tight zigzag or any kind of a heavy satin stitch, be it rounded, teardrop shape, whatever, if you have the open back, this will just glide right over that satin stitch. A lot of the feet, they're closed right here, and so when the zigzag hits that, it has nowhere to go, and that's why you get that bird's nest and things jam up.
So it's a channel for those thick threads.
Correct.
To lay inside.
Okay, and then the favorite stitch, what most people do, is called the buttonhole stitch or the blanket stitch. So I'm going to move over to my chalkboard.
Pam said that she always kind of wanted to be a kindergarten teacher, but she loves being the educator here, using all the fun techniques. And
okay, so after I kind of liked raw edge applique, but I really wanted to do the buttonhole stitch. So I loved this quilt. This is Cherry Gutrey's quilt, and you may have seen this hanging at the shop at some point in time. But this quilt has a lot of applique pieces. And I said, oh, I really want to do this, but I don't want the raw edge, just that single stitch. And I don't want to use a satin stitch on everything. I really want to use that buttonhole stitch. But I wasn't good at the buttonhole stitch. And I probably wasn't good at the buttonhole stitch for the same reason that a lot of you have the same problem. So if you look at all these little guys here where Katie was at,
circles, and
those are all teeny tiny, and that was all done on the sewing machine.
And you matched your threads so well, so it might not show up great, but these are all, I've never heard it called a buttonhole stitch. So it's the blanket stitch,
Blanket
same
stitch,
thing, right?
blanket stitch.
Exact same thing.
So anyways, if you have, on your sewing machine, you have several blanket stitches. And Joyce and I were talking about this the other day, that like Alex Anderson, who's been here, done educating here for us before, she likes the blanket stitch, which is basically single, where it comes down, over, bites the fabric, down, over, bites the fabric, like this. Ricky Timms, who is a phenomenal, he does this stitch so well. He likes the one that makes multiple passes. So he might choose the one that says forward, back, forward, and then it comes over here several times. And it goes back and forth and over. So he likes this really thick stitch.
So it's like a triple
It's kind of a triple. So if you look on your machine, you really have to look to find which blanket stitch. And before you start doing blanket stitch, you really need to know how your machine behaves. So I'm on a baby lock machine, and I can demonstrate this. I don't know how well we're going to see it, but he made so much sense to me when he did it. And I said, oh my gosh, it clicked. I came home and I did the quilt that I just showed you. So anyways, what he says is, let's say this is my applique piece right here. So this is, a piece of colored fabric that I put on my board, okay? If I'm going to do the stitch that is forward, over and back, forward, over and back, okay? I need to be saying that in my mind. And what he usually says is forward, hop, hop. Forward, back, forward, hop, hop. And, somebody walks in the room and hears you saying that, and they're like, who are you talking to? But anyways, what I like to do is drop my needle right here. So I always drop my needle first, and I know, and you're going to use an open toe foot. And I've got an open toe foot right there, Katie, to show them. So I don't know if you can see this foot, but the open toe foot really lets you see what you're doing, okay?
Mirror image.
And so let's say I was doing Ricky's, which goes forward, back, forward, and then it bites over here. Forward, back, forward, and it bites over, okay? So when I'm on this, and let me get a black pen here because I'm going to be a kindergarten teacher now for a few minutes. Okay. So when I get ready to do this, it's going to do 3 little dots here as my tie off, and I want my stitch to lay right on the outside here. So it's going to go forward, back, forward, hop, hop. forward, back, forward, hop, hop. Okay, now you can adjust the length of your forward, back, forward, and the width, which is your hop, hop. Okay, but what you have to say to yourself is, when do I pivot? So you want to have your sewing machine set for a pivot function. That means your needle goes down into the fabric, presser foot comes up, and you can turn it. So here's what happens. If I'm going forward, back, forward, that's all one stitch on the same line. The hop, hop should be at a 45-degree angle, okay? So you never want to pivot during the forward, back, forward, because what happens is if I do forward and I pivot, then you get a stitch out here. So what happens when I'm in class and we're showing how to do this, people say I always get a stitch that flies out somewhere. And that's because you pivot at the wrong time, okay? So if you think about this, forward, back, forward, we want all that to lay in the same place. So if you want it to lay in the same place, you can't pivot.
Pam is seeing the lights come on in my eyes right now.
And when you do the hop, hop, you want that to be on the same plane. So you don't want to pivot. So if you go forward, back, forward, and you do this, and then you pivot, your stitch comes out like that, okay? So you always want to pivot before the hop or after the hop. So forward, back, forward, hop, hop, forward, back, forward, okay? Now, if I want this to go this way, I'm going to pivot, then pivot. So coming down here, forward, back, forward, hop, hop, forward, back, forward, pivot, hop, hop, pivot, and now I'm going this way. Forward, back, forward, hop, hop. Forward, back, forward, hop, hop.
I'm going to be saying that in my head.
Doesn't that make sense?
It does, and it's got such a good rhythm to it.
Anyways, yeah. I think if you think about that, so if you're doing Alex Anderson's version, you're going to just be doing one, and your hop, hop is this, forward, hop, hop, forward, hop, hop. So that's why they say you need to know how your stitch behaves so you know when to do your pivot. So just remember, all your stitches that lay on top of each other, never pivot during that.
That's amazing. And I have to say, this
makes
blanket
sense,
stitch looks beautiful when you follow those rules. It does.
So, okay. So I'm not going to go to the machine to do that because I want to show you real quick. Okay. So what happens is, if you have an embroidery machine, you know that things that are set up in your embroidery machine, so if you're doing anything that is an embroidery pattern, they give you all that stuff. So it's already digitized. I found out with the AccuQuilt, so if you have the AccuQuilt and you have an embroidery machine, can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay, because I can't tell where you're
No, you're good.
Okay. So if you have an AccuQuilt and you buy a design, they have 3 different ways. They're free on AccuQuilt's website. You can go and you can get the blanket stitch, or I forget what the other stitches are, but there's 3 different stitches that you can get for free to do these.
And they're embroidery files.
The embroidery files, correct. Yes. I didn't know that. So when we got the gingerbread man in, I took the die home and I said, oh, I can do that on my IQ Designer. So, but just know though that you can do this if you have an AccuQuilt. You can just go ahead and do it on your embroidery machine. Now, what I wanted to tell you was, back to the beginning.
It comes full circle.
We started here, and I really want to do this, and I don't want to do the old-fashioned way. I want to do things really quickly. So what we can do is, and what I did is I took the pattern, and I actually took it into the Solaris sewing machine. So if you have a Baby Lock Destiny, Meridian, Altair, or Solaris, you can actually digitize it, and here is one row of it. Wow. So I just took the sample, the files, put it in the machine, and in less than 2 minutes I had it digitized, and I sewed all of these blocks in just several hours. So Julie, if you're watching, do not give me trouble on that. So but anyways, so I did some fills as well. So I'm just going to show you real quickly. If you've never seen the Baby Lock machine, it's really cool because you can take an embroidery, what's a pattern that you're supposed to do applique, and you can create an applique on this machine. And I'm going to show you real quick. So instead of doing the flower because it was multiple parts, I just went back to my basic starfish. So I'm going to come over here.
Get through.
Yep, sorry. Okay, and I'm going to go to my IQ Designer. And so what I've done is I've put my little guy on here. So anything that fits on your sketch pad, or if you're on the Meridian or the Altair, what fits in your hoop, you just simply put it on here. So this is exactly what I did with the flower petals, and I scanned them all at one time. I'm just going to go to my machine and I'm going to scan them. And so when I scan, and it's going to make about 3 or 4 passes over this, and then it's going to bring a picture up on my machine over here.
This technology is amazing. So you're teaching this as a class, right? So this is the sneak peek.
This is a sneak peek for the flowers, but I didn't do the flowers on there. I'm just showing you how easy this is to do.
I mean, this is probably the longest part, is waiting for it to scan.
It is, and the rest goes pretty fast. So, and I also left my purple thread hang, so.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, but it might leave a pass in here. And so now, when you look over here, and if you're on the Meridian or the Altair, you just take a picture of it, so you can see what my picture looks like over here. And so when I touch OK, I go in, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my eraser and erase the face and erase this stuff. Okay, so as not to take the time to do that, I'm going to show you the finished design that I already brought in, so that you don't have to wait to see it.
See, you're so efficient, Pam. She's quick.
Okay. So anyways, I would use my eraser and I would take out the things that I don't want. But here, I'm just going to grab my starfish. Okay, and I just want to show you how easy this is too. Oops, okay, come on, okay. Okay, so here's my starfish. And so you know when you're doing an applique, there's 3 parts if you're doing it in embroidery. There's a placement line, there is a tack down, and then there's a finishing stitch. So I'm literally going to go to my line properties. I'm going to grab a running stitch for my placement line. I'm going to touch a color and touch OK. And when I touch my bucket, that is now a placement stitch. Okay, so I'm just going to take it to embroidery this quick. I'm going to show you how easy it is to do an applique here. Okay, I'm going to go back to my IQ Designer. I'm going to pull that same design out again, so from my memory. And this time I'm going to make my tack down be a bean stitch. That's 3 passes of thread, and that's going to tack it so that I can go ahead and cut it away afterwards. Okay, and now taking it to embroidery, you can see there's 2. Here's the first one, which is my placement stitch. The second one lines up right on top of it. I'm going to go to add one more time. I'm going to go back to IQ Designer. This time I'm going to choose, like, let's say these little candle wicking stitches in a color, and I'm going to make it, oops, let me bring it in.
So it's just a
3-part thing.
3-step.
3-step, okay?
Yeah.
So I'm going to give this a candle wicking stitch. Now if I wanted to, I could fill it. So if I wanted to make it look quilted, I could go here and choose a fill. And there's like some 40 fills on here. Okay, let's just grab this, some little things here. And I'm going to fill this. Okay, now I can go in, I have total control over how big the lines are, how big my fills are, but if I do nothing and just take it all the way to embroidery, this is what it's going to look like. So the first line is going to be my placement line, the second's going to tack it down, then it's going to do the fill, and then it's going to do this. So to save time, I went ahead and stitched
See how quick you are.
So it did a placement line, I put my starfish fabric down, tacked it down, trimmed it away, and did my finishing stitch. So it's so easy to do, and anything that fits in your largest hoop or fits on that scan tablet, you can scan and turn it into a embroidery in no time at all. And there's also built-in shapes here, so this is one of the first things I did with the built-in shapes. So I just created leaves and did my little birds, and just created a cute little pillow. So but anyways, if you haven't seen how to do applique, it's so fast, it's so easy.
And we've come a long way.
It has come a long way. So I just like to take shapes. So I'll go to the internet and I'll just look up, I'll do like a coloring book image for the starfish, and that's what I came up with. So that anything that you can pull out, you can do. And Pam Nashi, who was just here recently, this was something she did for Baby Lock. So,
yeah.
you know, if you wanted to create your own thing, like lights and the stocking, these are all things that were just shapes that were pulled out of either the machine or taking an image and turning it into an applique. So it's really easy, and I hope that I will see all of you in an applique class soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Pam, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Like Joyce said, the email will come out in the next couple weeks with classes, and we'll see you soon.